Well, the SARS Commissioner, Kieswetter, says South Africa must fearlessly guard the integrity and independence of the Revenue Service. SARS has been under pressure to improve revenue collection and help stamp out corruption within its ranks even since the departure of controversial former Commissioner Tom Moyane. It's also faced a crippling strike earlier this year. Get you more on that story now. Bring in our reporter Govan Whittles, who's with the SARS Commissioner, I believe, Govan, so 25 years of the Revenue Service, even with all its trouble. How does it plan to improve for another 25 years?
Well, that plan is in the hands of Kieswetter. He's the Commissioner of SARS. He'll be speaking to us in a moment. Before we speak to him, interesting developments here at the 25th anniversary of the South African Revenue Service. Some commentary from one of the evidence leaders of the Nugent Commission saying that the turnaround has begun, but it'll take years before it's fully implemented. And then, on another note, Tembikile, we at Newzroom Afrika had the opportunity to speak to the President's spokesperson, Vincent Mdunge, who told us that the President has agreed that a review of the ministerial handbook is necessary, and the outcry from the general public regarding the handbook and what it offers to ministers is noted, and that some announcements around when that will happen will be expected from the Treasury. Let's get back to SARS. It's celebrating its 25th anniversary. It went through a tumultuous period, which the President described as having been one of the internationally leading revenue services to one that was perceived by the general public as not being trustworthy, and now it's being turned around. Let's talk about this with Mr. Kieswetter. Commissioner, thank you so much for your time once again. So strong words from the President, and the focus really on the turnaround at SARS. Let's begin with that. How far along do you think the turnaround is, and what do you think is most urgent to keep it going?
Thank you. I think to understand the turnaround, one has to understand the incalculable damage that has been caused at the level of not only the pause to the modernization and technology development, but also the flight of skills, but most importantly and sadly, the erosion of the human fiber, the loss of confidence and trust. And SARS is a huge ship, and the turnaround is not one big event, but a process of accumulation of activities. Many of those foundational activities has already taken place. So let me name a few of them. Firstly, we are now an organization with a clear vision and a crystal clear strategic intent. It is well documented, evangelized throughout the organization, and continually reinforced in every conversation. Secondly, we have substantively addressed the leadership of SARS. We have, apart from changing many of the senior leaders, we've also, many of whom have left, we've also begun to reassign leaders to roles more appropriate to their interest, their competence, and their level of contribution. And now it is about slowly and surely putting in place the building blocks of a clear compliance strategy. You saw some of the early successes we have shared in terms of stepping up our debt collection, stepping up our audit function, our verification function, introducing a greater level of data analytics and artificial intelligence, and expanding our technology platform. And so we believe that this process of rebuilding, rather than project of rebuilding, is a multi-year journey, looking at both the hardware, which is the technology and data, but also the mindware, which is the brilliance of our people, and most importantly, their hearts and souls. It is not something you can write down in a program of steps, but it is an organic process that has begun and substantively beginning to show the successes if we continue to maintain its course.
One of the areas at SARS which had been identified as having lost capacity was its ability to do investigations and carry those out, and you've tried to increase that capacity with more auditors. But would you say that SARS is now back to its previous level of ability to investigate and track down people who are either dodging tax or trying to take money out of the country illegally?
We have three strategic objectives. It doesn't start with detecting non-compliance. It starts by ensuring that taxpayers are clear about their obligations. Secondly, by ensuring that we continually make it easy for taxpayers to fulfill those obligations, and that gives us the moral high ground to then enforce responsibly but assertively those who seek to not comply, whether that non-compliance is just negligence or criminal. Now, in order to enforce appropriately, we need to have the ability to collect and process and predict risks to the tax base. And so we've seen in the last few years a significant investment in data science, in machine learning algorithms, and in artificial intelligence to help us understand which taxpayers present the highest risk to us. Then to be able to select those taxpayers, and then using data insights further to equip the work of auditors who then apply their mind, but using data insights and not just a uncalibrated response, is increasingly beginning to bear fruit. Last year we have seen that we have detected, you mentioned this morning, religious institutions. We've detected significant abuse in the PPE procurement and other areas where people's lifestyle is inconsistent with what they disclose. And so by understanding that, for example, we've raised 500 million through a piece of work we did from people who have second properties but did not disclose rental income. Or we've uncovered 600 entities who were abusing their VAT registration status purely for the purpose of frauding the VAT refund system. That risk management work last year has allowed SARS to prevent the outflow of 63 billion rand of impermissible refunds. And so you can see it has a compound effect, but fundamentally it is building a business model that is the synthesis of people plus data plus technology in a way that forms a seamless environment within which our employees can perform their work, but also through which employees can engage with us.
Let's talk about those employees. You had a strike, and in April, some of those employees directed strong criticism at yourself as commissioner. Would you say that you've resolved your issues that were raised with the unions? Or do you anticipate that you've put them in abeyance and that they are about to resurface?
Well, I can tell you, let me start with the good news, that we have signed an agreement with our trade unions that they will accept 1.5% of an increase in order to bring the organization to stability and to perform our mandate. And then to watch what happens in the broader public sector with a view of reviewing that once the public sector wage bill has been settled. But let me now rewind towards the disgruntlement by our employees. Firstly, South Africa is caught in this grip of high inflation, of rising prices, and unemployment. And so we have to first acknowledge that the difficulty and the experience of South Africans is real, and our SARS employees are part of this universe. Secondly, SARS is a microcosm of South Africa. And so the disgruntlement across the board of wages is also reflected here. And in a way, SARS was a proxy for the rest of the civil service to give expression to their discontent. Because of the coherence within which we find ourselves, I can also thankfully share that the impact of the strike was minimal for two reasons. Firstly, because most of our employees came to work, remained committed, and continued to deliver their service. And secondly, because of our increasing reliance on data and technology to deliver a service through digital platforms. So we are happy that we have re-engaged. We are talking about how do we make life better for our employees, not just financially, but also just the overall value proposition that they have with us. And we are confident that it's not an overnight fix, but we are confident that over time we will deepen that level of engagement that we have with our employees.
Seems like you're saying that the review is imminent. We've seen public sector workers and unions saying that the government offered 3.5 is being considered, but the inflation is closer to 7%, and there's a trend from public sector workers to demand CPI-based increases. Is SARS preparing for a review that will lead to higher percentage point increases, or are you at this point not able to consider something close to consumer price index?
Well, firstly, we are thankful that we are back at work and focused on delivering our mandate to South Africans. Secondly, you must understand that SARS does not determine its own resources. It is allocated funding from national government through Treasury and the Ministry of Finance, confirmed through the parliamentary processes. We have to live within our means. Government has to live within our means. So whilst we all would like higher salaries, and we all would like an improvement in our benefits, at some point in time, we have to move beyond ourselves and ask, what can the country afford? Within SARS, we can only afford what we are allocated by Treasury and live within the means. So your specific question, whether we will review or consider any additional increase, can only be answered by what are the resources that I will receive. We have an in-principle agreement that the Minister of Finance, together with the colleagues in Treasury who manage the budgeting process, will also, once the broader public sector wage is settled, will then also make available the resources for SARS to improve our current agreement, which is the 1.5%. Where it will end will pretty much be a function of, firstly, where the unions and government will find itself, and the level of resources that's made available for that.
All right, thank you so much. That's the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service, Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, speaking to us about the turnaround at SARS, but also what's expected with regards to its employees. Looks like the attention is back on the public sector unions that are currently in negotiations, and what they decide there will have a material impact on the revenue service. We saw this year that a strike can happen at SARS, and if they are called to strike by the public sector unions, if a dispute is declared, it might happen again, but the Commissioner certainly will do everything to stop that from happening.